3.
Okay, so ladies, today in our PLC we're going to talk about reteaching. Reteaching is important because why give an assessment if we are not going to review the assessment and reteach the misconceptions that the students have? Our reteaching should not be a one-time occurrence, it should be a continual process, such as spiraling in even in different units. When I talk to you about reteaching, there are two main topics we're going to discuss, or techniques. Modeling. Modeling is the easiest for me because it's easy, it's quick, but it does not give students ownership of their learning. Guided discourse, the students are actively involved and they have to apply more critical thinking skills. So in modeling, let me illustrate to you, let me model to you how I want you to model to your students. Such as in balancing equations, my students will be given a copy of the exact same equation. They will be instructed to follow every technique that I use. So we will count our atoms. Iron is 1, bromine is 3. And then I would use my thought process and ask the students, why is bromine 3? And we will discuss because of the subscript that tells me how many atoms. Hydrogen is 2 because of the subscript. Sulfur is 1 because there's no subscript, so that means it is just 1. Oxygen will be 4. And students, in showing you this, I want you to keep all of the elements in the same order. So iron is 2 because of the subscript 2. Let's find bromine. Bromine is 1 because there is no subscript. Hydrogen is 1, again because there is no subscript. Sulfur, we have to use our subscript outside the parentheses. 1 times 3 is 3. Oxygen, I have a subscript of 4 here and a subscript of 3. So what do? Multiply. 4 times 3 is 12. Does it look like it is balanced? No. What is my first one that is not balanced? Is iron. So I put a coefficient that tells me the number of molecules. 2 irons equals 2. 2 bromines times 3 is 6. So now I need 6 bromines over here. So we can put a coefficient for the whole molecule. So now I have 6 hydrogens, 6 bromines. My hydrogen is 6 here. So what should I put here? A coefficient of 3 to go with the 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3 sulfurs. 3 times 4 is 12 oxygens. 2 and 2, 6 and 6. 3 and 3, 12 and 12. So that is how I want you to use your exit ticket and complete these. Now the next we're going to talk about is guided discourse. This one's my favorite, but it's a little bit long-winded, a little bit more work. First, talk, write first, talk second. So I would give my students a topic. Why should we balance equations? Is there any law, any reason for balancing equations? While the students are writing, I'm walking across the room, observing their notes, so I know who has it, who doesn't. Then I'm going to put up an exemplar and a non-exemplar sample and tell the students to look at it. Once they figured out which one they choose is correct, to turn and talk with their fellow classmates and discuss which one they chose and why that one is correct. While walking around the classroom, I can get a gauge of who understands and who doesn't. Then I'm going to poll the classroom. Raise your hand if you chose 1, if you chose 2. Then we're going to start a class discussion of why, who chose what. I'm just going to be the monitor. The students lead the class discussion. Then I am going to have the students do it. You do it. I'll put up a different chemical equation, and the students have to work together within the class to solve the correct equation. Okay, so Ms. Allen, looking at your test data, graphing on a coordinate grid seems to be a struggle. How would you model this to your students?
Okay, so if I was modeling that for my students, this is an example from a STAR test from last year. So first we would talk about the table, okay? And I would remind the kids that when you are graphing on a coordinate grid, you're looking at 3 things. You're looking at a table, you're looking at the graph, and if there's an equation, which there's not in this, then I would remind them to look at an equation. The first thing I would want them to do is I'd want them to show their strategies. I would want them to remind themselves that the x-coordinate in a graph, from a table to a graph, is always going to be the x-axis. And that is the one that goes horizontal. And I would want them to write out that the y-coordinate is always going to be on the y-axis, and have them draw out that is the one that goes vertical.
So it's like you would give them the same.
I would give them this.
And have them follow
along, and I want them to show me every strategy, because before they ever even start looking at answers, I want them to show me which one's X, which one's Y. Then from there, I would want them to come out to the side and create the ordered pair. And again, I don't want them to even look at answers yet until they have done all of this stuff. So with an ordered pair, I've taught them, and I would want them to show that it's always the x-coordinate first and the y-coordinate second. So I'd want them to take these and write them as an ordered pair, all of them, okay?
So while you're doing this, your students are mimicking what you're doing on paper.
Yes, because I want them to take the table and I want them to write it as an ordered pair. All of them. Oops, sorry. Okay, and for me, what I've taught the students and what I would remind them is that the first one is always over and the second one is up. We always say that together. We always say over, up. And that's why we write it vertically as an ordered pair. Okay, then I would want them to go to every answer choice and draw their arrows over and up. Actually, first, what I would want them to do in their answer choices, because there are intervals here, I'd want them to figure out what is between 0 and 1 going across, and what is between 0 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. And I'd want them to go ahead and write that down. So between 0 and 1, that represents a half, so on and so forth. And do that all the way up, okay? And I would want them to do that for every single one, so that when they go over and when they go up, they can see that. So my first ordered pair is to go over 1 and up 1.5. So over 1, up 1.5 is here, not here. So that makes this a wrong answer. Actually, I would want them to check every single one, but as you can see, if you do it, every single one is going to be off, okay? Then you'd go to the next one. So over 1, up to 1.5. That's good. Over to 2, up to 2.5. That one's good. Over to 3, up to 3.5. That one's good. Then over to 4, up to 4.5. Now, that's not necessarily wrong, but that's not on this table. So I would want them to put a question mark here. Then I'd go to the next answer choice and do the same thing. Over to 1, up to 1.5. Over to 2, 2.5. 3, 3.5. Then this one goes over to 5, up to 5.5, which matches our table. And the last one over to 6, up to 6.5. So this is also a possibility. Probably the best answer. And I'd want them to check the last one. So again, we go over to 1.5, up to 1, which that's backwards, sorry. Over to 1, up to 1.5. Actually, at this point, I would probably tell them, this is the most common mistake when you're graphing, is that you get your X and your Y backwards. And so I'd want them to show me that yet again. Okay, that's backwards. It should be up to here, sorry. Okay, so this would also make this wrong because it's backwards.
So when modeling this, this is what your students' papers should look like.
This is what I want them to
An
have.
exemplar should look like.
Right, and so then we'd go back to our 2 question marks, and I'd say, okay, I need to pick between one or the other. And because this has 4 and 4.5 labeled, but it's not on here, that makes that the wrong answer. This one, every single one that's on the table that's in our ordered pairs is graphed.
Excellent.
And that's how and that's what I would want them to be showing me at their table. Okay.
Your modeling is excellent. Rhonda, would you like to show us? Okay, so Ms. Honeycutt, I noticed that 5.9B, food chains, food webs, that was a low TEAC, a low standard. So using discourse, what would you do to begin with?
Okay. First, I would provide the students with a writing prompt, something I could walk around and monitor, perhaps something, tell me the difference between food chains and food webs. I could walk around monitoring, seeing what they wrote down, trying to decide if there were any misconceptions and clarifying as I monitored the students' writing.
And this will give you an opportunity to notice which students have a higher understanding, which students have a lower understanding,
Okay.
to help you with the class discussion.
Sure.
So what would you do for show call?
In show call, I could provide them with an exemplar and a non-exemplar. I would have the students take a look at each of the examples, essentially one example and one non-example, have them review them, and then turn and talk to their shoulder buddy maybe. Go ahead and share with that student, which one do you believe is the example, which one do you believe is the non-example, and why?
And that's good because now all kids are participating.
True.
Okay, so, go ahead.
I guess then I could use the strategic questioning, give them a little higher level thinking question, and say, okay, so we've determined that number 1 is our exemplar, and what would happen if we removed the lizard from the food web, okay? And then at that point, the classroom discussion would ensue, turn and talk with your neighbor. We could discuss exactly what would happen if we remove that lizard from the food web. The grasshopper population might increase, the mouse population may decrease because that participant was removed from the food web.
Excellent. So for you do, what would be?
Okay, so you do the last part of the guided discourse. We could go back to one of the release star questions, and I could go through, we could read through the question, okay, and have a classroom discussion based on the question. Which answer would be correct? Which statement correctly describes the transfer of energy in a food chain in this wetland? Have them again go ahead and do the shoulder talk, talk to a buddy, and in addition, explain why they chose that answer.
And let the students lead. You're the monitor, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent.
Okay,
Good job.
thank you.